Growing up, I always thought I was an RTS fan, and if you watch this channel, you probably thought I was too. But years of losing Age of Empire 2 matches because I'd rather set up farm villages slowly convinced me that really, what I like are city builders and colony sims, and as a kid I didn't know that those existed as their own thing. Sure, fighting can be part of that, and it's fun when it is, but if I'm not primarily setting up buildings and crops, what's the point? So today we're checking out the demo build of a cute little upcoming indie game, Circle of Kerzoven, with an early demo key having been kindly provided by the developers. They haven't told me what to say, which means I had to write this video on my own. In the default scenario, you start with 10 villagers, all of whom have a hierarchy of needs to be fulfilled. You have your standard food and shelter type Maslow needs, but you also have the need to not freeze to death separate from those, which I've never thought of an active need on its own, but honestly fair enough. These are organized into different tiers, with each tier of needs filling consecutively, and having a villager reach each tier is what unlocks the new tiers of buildings. You start with basic shacks, but then you move up to nicer cabins, and finally into things like smelting metal, although the demo ends before you get to some of these higher tier buildings. Animals in the wild also have their own needs, which is why when I built my storehouse, it turned into a gathering spot for these sneaky sheep who kept taking my food until I built some really expensive walls to keep them out so my villagers wouldn't have to keep chasing them away. At the very least, in the early parts of the game, the size of your colony is more towards the scale of, say, Rimworld than Cities or Anno, but you don't have the same level of direct control over your villagers as you normally would in some of the smaller scale games. Your main input is in placing the structures and job sites, which I did incredibly poorly, and then assigning or unassigning villagers to different jobs, then raising or lowering their priority. So I did end up speeding up time a lot while waiting for certain resources to be gathered. While there's definitely some deep simulation going on, I do wish I could see a bit more of it. Often the status of a villager will just say completing task, and while I respect their privacy, they're here for my enjoyment. So I really do need them to tell me what they're doing. It'd also just be nice to know when they're fulfilling certain tasks. The need for social interaction with friends and family is one of the tier 2 needs, and there's also a need for offspring, so I assume they have specific relationships, but at least at the moment none of that seems particularly exposed, so much like in real life I'm not quite sure how babies are made in the game, though I assume it happens at the higher needs levels which I just couldn't reach in the demo. I did get to almost double my original population, but this was done through migration. There are actually multiple maps going on at the same time with different factions present on each map, and where environmental effects and resources along with water flow get tracked between all of them. And while I didn't quite get to start doing this myself yet either, you can actually start building different colonies on different maps. So they can all be running in parallel with the purpose of collecting some of the resources that are exclusive to different regions. As I was building my gigantic community center to achieve an early set of goals, I did start to struggle with food. I think this was because I was further from resources with my gathering hut than I should have been, since it seemed to be alleviated when I built a second one. The community center upgrade project was also going on at the same time as I was upgrading my villagers from their sad little shacks to some nice fancy new cabins. A lot of these upgrades were really more for the curb appeal of my village rather than the good of my villagers, because I still had many of them without proper clothing. Though in my defense I wouldn't have objected to them having clothing, they just weren't gathering enough grass to make the clothing yet. Probably for similar reasons as the food issue. With a lot of jobs to do and no direct control and only so many civilians, I was trying to figure out the best way to manage them and prioritize the right jobs. But even when I was putting people solely on the jobs to collect and process those resources, I was struggling a bit to figure out exactly how and when they were being collected, or what the limiting factor was on them not being able to collect them at the time. Everything started to turn around in the village though when I finally got to the real draw, much like in Age of Empires 2, the farm. There were still sheep and hares feeling entitled to my wheat, but even though by this point I had more than enough for them to be able to just graze to their heart's content, and I had a perpetual stone shortage, I still built a stone fence to keep them out, right next to the Hunter's Lodge for some nice food synergy. The demo didn't have all the game's content being a demo, but I still managed to build up a nice little community and get things going on the right track. There's definitely still some depth to the insight you can have on villagers, which I think would hugely benefit the game, but I did find myself wanting to come back and play some more, which is always a good first sign. If you too love digital farms and want to check out the game for yourself, there will be a link in the description to the demo version on Steam. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.